Let's have a look at Key Stage 1 in the IDSR. In 2017, we were looking at your school's performance for all pupils, disadvantaged pupils, and for pupils who are emerging, expected and exceeding in early years. However, the Ofsted School Inspection Update for November 2017 said that the early learning groups allow inspectors to reflect on a school's approach to early literacy and numeracy. It is not a value-added measure, nor is it an accountability measure, and should not be reported on as an outcome. So what Ofsted has done in 2018 is removed the emerging, expected and exceeding analysis, which for me is a bit of a shame, because some schools have got a disproportionately high number of pupils who are emerging at early years compared to the national average, and it was useful to be able to show progress from your early years emerging to Key Stage 1, your early years expected to Key Stage 1, and exceeding to Key Stage 1, and see how close you were to national averages. And such an analysis to me seemed to help schools. However, in the Ofsted inspection reports, it is very rare that Ofsted actually looks at emerging, expected and exceeding, and I think now it simply does not happen. If you look at our blog on DAISI Education, we'll see that there is a Ofsted inspection blog, and it looks at your school compared to the national average for the expected standard and for the greater depth standard. So if you want to see more of this, please have a look at our blog. So we have for reading, writing, maths and science, your school's expected or above and greater depth in the darker blue bars compared to the national, and compared to the national other for your disadvantaged pupils. So remember, this is the closing the gap, the diminishing the differences measure. Your school's disadvantaged pupils, who are pupils who have been eligible for free school meals at any point in the last 6 years, have been in care in the past year for 1 day or more, it used to be 6 months, it's now 1 day, or have left care through adoption or another formal means. So that is the definition of disadvantaged. So these pupils are being compared against the national all and the other, and the idea is to see over time how your school is doing to close the gap. So this analysis and the ASP analysis does not show the over time bit. So Ofsted inspectors may not know immediately how you have done in 2016, 2017, 2018. So if 2018 was a one-off, you dipped a bit on the low side perhaps, then make sure you have your 2017 and 2016 analysis to compare, and then pupils, it can be shown that maybe your current school's performance is a one-off. So you'll see here, for instance, we are roughly at the national average for overall and disadvantaged, but I say roughly. Let's have a look. We've got 3 columns: percentage diff, so this is the difference in terms of national average, and your cohort number. Now, it's this diff no that I want to concentrate on. This difference shows the number of pupils between your school and national, and is calculated as follows. You take the gap between your school and national, you multiply it by the cohort number, convert it to a fraction, so 10% or minus 10% becomes minus 0.1. You multiply it by the cohort number, that gives minus 4.6, and then you truncate it. You remove everything after the decimal place, which is good news for you if you're minus 0.9 pupils below, because then you will be in line with the national average. It's not so good news if you're plus 0.9 pupils above, unfortunately. So here we can see at this Key Stage 1, this school is 2 pupils below the national average for the expected standard and 1 pupil below for the greater depth standard. For the disadvantaged pupils, there's only a 5 cohort, so we are at the national average for your disadvantage because each pupil would be 20%, 100 divided by 5. So we're less than 20% away, but we are 1 pupil below in some respect for the disadvantage. Why are there 2 sets of figures here? The first figure is the school the national all, and the second is the national other, the non-disadvantaged. So we are in line with the national all, but below for the national other. So you can see we are slightly above for writing at the expected standard, slightly below at the greater depth standard for mathematics, and way above 6 pupils above for science. So what are the areas to investigate for Key Stage 1? Well, first of all, attainment in maths, reading or writing. Notice none of these are areas to investigate include science, was significantly above average and in the highest 10% of pupils. So in other words, they are at above 88% for reading and for maths. Now you do have in the resources to this presentation a list of all of these percentages that I'm going to be showing you. Alternatively, the attainment was significantly below average and in the lowest 10% of all pupils, so you need to be around the low 60s or below for that. Name of subject was in the bottom 20% for at least 3 years for all pupils, and this is important. If you're looking at a single year, we're looking at the top or bottom 10%. If we're looking at a trend, if we're looking at 2 or 3 years, we're looking at the top or bottom 20%. So you have to be in the bottom 20% for at least 3 years to get this as an area to investigate. So that would mean the mid 60s or below for reading and for maths. For your disadvantaged pupils, were you at or above national for the disadvantaged group? Now that is not literally what it seems to be on the first face value. It means how were you compared to the national average that we're using for the disadvantaged group? In other words, were you above the national other? So that is this real strength if your disadvantaged pupils are above the national other. And with all of these areas to investigate, you need at least 11 pupils for this to count as a strength or weakness for 1 year, and you need at least 6 pupils in each year group, in each cohort set. So here your disadvantaged pupils, you need at least 6 disadvantaged pupils in each year over a trend. So this next one, reading, writing, maths attainment was in the bottom 20% for at least 3 years. Not only would you need to be in the mid 40s or below, you would also need to have at least 6 pupils in each of the 3 years. So if you had 7, 5, 7, that wouldn't count because you wouldn't have 6 pupils in each of the years. And that's it. So nothing to do with science, nothing to do with emerging, expected or exceeding, and Ofsted don't seem to be using that in their latest inspections. So in the next video, we'll have a look at some points to ponder for Key Stage 1. So now might be a good time to have a look at your IDSR and see how this compares with these figures. And the reason I'm showing you all of these figures, even though your school doesn't have all of these statements, is to show you how close you may be. So maybe you are very close to being above the national other, and you can see that from the IDSR charts. This might help with goal setting for your current 2019 cohort. So let's have a look at some points to ponder for Key Stage 1. How did you do? Was there a difference between subjects? What about your greater depth? We're seeing a lot more emphasis on the greater depth in Key Stage 1. What groups made the most progress and which made the least? And again, was there a variance between subjects? Were you in the top or bottom 10 or 20% compared to all pupils nationally? How did you do compared to the national average at the expected and the greater depth? How did this vary between subjects and groups? Now, it used to be that Ofsted were also looking at early years development overall, so your emerging, expected, exceeding. However, there seems to be a de-emphasis of this. Does your school improvement plan clearly identify areas for improvement? Are the targets set for improvement ambitious enough? Are they measurable? Is a timescale realistic? In other words, are they SMART? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. Are milestones in place to show whether pupils are on track to reach their targets, and who evaluates them? How? When? What about your subject leaders? How and when did they monitor? And do they know what the quality of teaching is like in the area across the school? And do they know the picture of standards across the school? So in other words, we're not just talking about Key Stage 1 here. We're talking about Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So even if you've got a Key Stage 1 teacher, if he or she is a subject leader in reading, does she know what reading is like in Key Stage 2? And what professional development has taken place to support subject development across the school? We're noticing a number of inspectors referring to local authority partners who have come into school to support subject development. So that is Key Stage 1 and some points to ponder. Thank you very much for watching this video. Why not like us and subscribe to this channel? And why not subscribe to our free premium mailing list, where you can get 10% off our best prices and advance notice on what's happening.